They said he was just another statistic, another black kid from a broken neighborhood, destined for a prison cell or a grave. And for a while, he believed them, until the day the system took everything from him, and he realized he had two choices: let the streets define his future or fight for a second chance. But here's what they don't tell you. The ones who hit rock bottom, they're the ones who rise the highest. This is the story of a boy who lost everything, only to come back stronger than anyone ever expected. And trust me, you won't believe where he ends up. The afternoon heat clung to the cracked pavement like a second skin, the air thick with the scent of fried food from the bodega on the corner and the faint metallic tang of a city that never truly rested. The basketball court on Edison Avenue was alive with the rhythmic sound of sneakers screeching against concrete, the dull thud of a ball bouncing, and the occasional chorus of laughter and trash talk. It was a familiar symphony in Oak Ridge Heights, a neighborhood where dreams were often swallowed whole before they had a chance to grow. Jamal Carter sat on the steps of his apartment building, watching it all unfold. 17 years old, tall and lean, his dark brown skin gleamed with a thin layer of sweat under the relentless sun. His short dreadlocks framed a face that was sharper than most boys his age, a face that had learned to hide too much, too soon. His mother, LaToya, had left for her second job hours ago, her goodnight kiss pressed hastily against his forehead that morning before the sun even rose. Jamal pulled at the hem of his faded t-shirt, listening to the street chatter. A couple of guys from the crew, the ones everyone either feared or admired, were parked across the street, music vibrating through the steel of a gleaming black Charger. Dante, their leader, leaned against the car, flashing that easy smile that made people forget who he really was, a predator in gold chains and designer sneakers. "You just gonna sit there all day, Carter?" Dante's voice cut through the noise like a blade, smooth and commanding. The guys around him chuckled, their confidence thick as the smoke curling from the cigarette in Dante's fingers. Jamal hesitated. He knew the rules of Oak Ridge Heights. You were either invisible or you were useful, and Dante had decided that Jamal was useful. He stood, slipping his hands into the pockets of his jeans, and walked over. The group shifted, making space for him like they already knew he belonged. "You good?" Dante asked, offering him a cigarette. Jamal shook his head. "Yeah, I'm good." Dante smirked, flicking the ash onto the pavement. "You're smart, Carter. Too smart to be broke. Too smart to be wasting your time watching the world go by." His voice was smooth, almost hypnotic. "You keep running errands for me. You won't have to stress about nothing. Money in your pocket, respect in the streets. You want that, don't you?" Jamal glanced down at his sneakers, battered, the soles wearing thin. He thought about his mother, coming home exhausted, her hands rough from cleaning houses she'd never be able to afford. He thought about the empty fridge, the eviction notices that came more often than birthday cards. "Yeah," he said finally. "I do." Dante grinned. "Then stick with us. We take care of our own." A horn blared from down the street, and Mrs. Holloway, the old lady who lived in apartment 3B, shouted out her window, "Y'all need to get off my damn block with that noise." Laughter erupted as the Charger roared to life, music blaring. Jamal watched them drive off, his fingers tightening in his pockets. Something gnawed at the edges of his thoughts, something uneasy, but he ignored it. That night, he lay awake in his room, the ceiling fan creaking overhead. Outside, the distant sound of sirens cut through the night. He had made his choice, and choices always came with consequences. The air was thick with humidity, the kind that made your clothes cling to your skin and your patience wear thin. Streetlights buzzed overhead, their dull glow casting long shadows down Edison Avenue. It was late, but Oak Ridge Heights never really slept. Too many people hustling, surviving, waiting for their break. Jamal Carter sat on the steps of his apartment building, his knee bouncing, fingers drumming against his thigh. His phone buzzed. Dante. "Pull up on 14th. Got something easy for you." Jamal swallowed hard. He had been running small errands for the crew for weeks now, picking up packages, dropping off cash, being a reliable set of eyes. Never anything serious, never anything that would land him in real trouble. But tonight felt different. He hesitated before typing back. "What is it?" Dante's reply was instant. "Just need you to drive. That's it. Easy money." Jamal exhaled slowly, staring at the cracked pavement beneath his feet. His mom's voice echoed in his head. "You stay out of trouble, you hear me? Ain't nothing out there for you but a cage or a coffin." But money was tight, real tight. And this was just driving, nothing more. He grabbed his keys and headed out. The parking lot of Rico's convenience store was nearly empty, just a couple of old sedans parked near the flickering neon sign. The hum of the city felt distant as Jamal pulled up to the curb, his fingers gripping the steering wheel tighter than he wanted to admit. Dante and Kev, another one of the crew's regulars, were already waiting. They slid into the back seat, moving fast, their energy wired. "All right, Carter, just keep the engine running," Dante said, tapping his knee. "We'll be in and out. 2 minutes tops." Jamal's stomach twisted. He glanced at Dante through the rearview mirror. "What are we doing, man?" Dante scoffed, leaning forward. "Nothing crazy, just picking up something from the store. Ain't no cops, ain't no drama. You worry too much." Jamal's gut screamed at him to leave. Say no, walk away. But then Dante flashed a grin and pulled out a wad of cash, peeling off a few bills before tossing them onto the passenger seat. "For your time." Jamal clenched his jaw. Money like that would put food in the fridge, help his mom breathe a little easier. 2 minutes, he muttered. Dante smirked. "That's my guy." And then they were gone, slipping through the store's glass doors. Jamal drummed his fingers against the wheel, heart hammering. Against his ribs. He checked the clock. 30 seconds. A man walked past, throwing him a quick glance before lighting a cigarette. The night smelled like asphalt and bad decisions. 1 minute. He adjusted the mirror. A shadow moved inside the store. Then, boom! The sound shattered the night. Jamal flinched as a crash erupted inside. A scream followed. His pulse spiked. Dante and Kev burst through the doors, Kev gripping a duffel bag, Dante shouting, "Drive! Drive! Drive!" Jamal's body moved before his brain did. He slammed the gear shift into drive and floored it, the tires screeching against the pavement as they tore out of the lot. His breaths came in sharp gasps. "What the hell did you do?" Kev was panting, laughing. Man, that dude wasn't supposed to fight back. Jamal's stomach turned to ice. "What?" "Relax," Dante said, checking his watch like they had just left a party. "Nobody died." Jamal felt sick. His hands were slick with sweat as he gripped the wheel. His eyes darted to the rearview mirror. Flashing red and blue lights appeared at the end of the block. "Oh man," Kev groaned. "Don't stop," Dante barked. Jamal's mind spun. He was just supposed to drive, just supposed to make easy money. Now the cops were on him, and nothing about this felt easy. He took a sharp turn, tires screeching. A siren wailed. His heart pounded. This wasn't supposed to happen. Another turn. Wrong move. A dead end. The red and blue lights filled the alley as the squad cars boxed him in. "Get out of the car!" A voice boomed through a loudspeaker. Dante and Kev cursed, hands flying up. But Jamal just sat there, staring at his shaking hands, realizing he had just thrown his whole future away. The cold from the concrete seeped into Jamal Carter's skin as he sat in the holding cell, his back against the cinder block wall. His hands, still clammy from the adrenaline, rested on his knees, the dried sweat making his fingertips feel rough against the fabric of his jeans. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed, flickering slightly, casting a sickly yellow glow over the cramped space. He could still hear the sirens in his head, the pounding of his heart when the cops had dragged him out of. The car slammed him onto the hood, cuffed him. The weight of the steel around his wrists had burned into his skin. Kev and Dante had said nothing. They let him take the fall. He hadn't even been inside the store, hadn't touched anything, hadn't hurt anyone. But none of that mattered. Because in Oak Ridge Heights, a black kid behind the wheel of the getaway car was just as guilty as the ones who ran out with the duffel bag. His mother's voice echoed in his head, trembling, devastated, when she had come to see him before the arraignment. "Jamal, please tell me this isn't real." Her eyes, always tired but full of love, had been swollen from crying. Her fingers trembled as she pressed them against the glass, separating them, like she could still hold him, still protect him from the world. And he had no words. The public defender had barely looked at him before explaining his options in the driest, most matter-of-fact tone. "You can take the plea, 5 years, maybe 4 with good behavior, or we roll the dice at trial, and if the jury sees you the wrong way, could be 10. 10 years. Jamal had wanted to scream that he was innocent, that he didn't even know what was happening until it was too late, that Dante had set him up. But the judge saw what they always saw, a black teenager from a poor neighborhood, and she barely looked at him before she said the words that made the ground beneath his feet disappear. 6 years in state prison, no parole for the first 3. Prison was nothing like the movies. There were no quiet, somber moments of reflection, no respect given just for surviving. It was a war zone with no exit. Jamal learned fast. Don't make eye contact with the wrong people. Stay invisible. But it was hard to disappear when you were fresh meat. His first week, a guy named Rico, a stocky, tattooed gang member with a scar running from his eyebrow to his jaw, made sure Jamal knew where he stood. "You knew, huh?" Rico had leaned against the cafeteria table, eyes sharp. "That means you at the bottom." Jamal kept his gaze on his tray, his stomach turning at the sight of the mush they called food. "You got a choice, kid," Rico continued, his voice low. "You stick with us, or you get eaten alive." Jamal didn't answer, and that was enough for Rico to see weakness. The first punch caught him in the ribs, the second across his jaw. Jamal hit the ground hard, his ears ringing as the guards rushed in. Blood filled his mouth, metallic and warm. He spit onto the floor, blinking through the pain, and for the first time since he got locked up, he wondered if maybe he belonged there after all. The next few weeks passed in a blur of routine. Wake up, survive, go back to your cell, repeat. The noise never stopped. The clang of metal doors, the distant shouting, the occasional fight that ended in someone being dragged away. Jamal kept his head down, kept breathing, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was it, that his life had ended the night he got in that car. Then one day, when he was sitting alone in the library, one of the only places in the prison that didn't smell like sweat and fear, a voice broke through his thoughts. "You keep staring at that book like it's gonna read itself." Jamal looked up. Mr. Anderson. He was older, maybe in his late 50s, his graying beard neatly trimmed, his prison uniform looking almost respectable the way he wore it. He wasn't big, not intimidating, but something about the way he carried himself made people stay out of his way. Jamal shrugged, his fingers still resting on the open book in front of him. It was a history book, something he had picked up just to avoid going back to his cell. Mr. Anderson pulled out a chair, settling into it with a slow exhale. "You don't belong here," he said after a moment. Jamal's chest tightened. He had heard that before, from his mom, from his teachers, from the few friends who hadn't ended up in the same cycle, and yet here he was. "Neither do you," Jamal muttered, keeping his eyes on the pages. Anderson chuckled, but it was dry. almost bitter. I used to think that too. Thought I was better than this place, smarter. Told myself I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. His gaze darkened. Then I realized I kept making the same damn choices. And choices. He tapped the book in front of Jamal. They write your story. You don't like how it's going? Change the ending. Jamal wanted to argue, wanted to say that it wasn't that simple, that he didn't have choices, but instead he just asked, how? And that was the moment everything changed. The prison library smelled of old paper and dust, a stark contrast to the cold, metallic stench of the rest of the facility. It was one of the few places where the noise of the yard didn't reach, where the tension that clung to the walls like a permanent shadow seemed to ease, even if just a little. Jamal Carter sat at a wooden table near the back, his fingers tracing the edge of a thick book he had pulled from the shelf but hadn't yet opened. He wasn't sure why he was here, maybe because it was better than the yard, where fights broke out over things as small as the wrong glance. Or maybe because Mr. Anderson's words still echoed in his head. Choices write your story. You don't like how it's going? Change the ending. He exhaled, tapping the book's cover. He had never been the kid who got lost in books. School had been more about survival than learning, trying not to fall asleep in class after long nights of listening to his mom cry about bills, trying to avoid fights in the hallway, trying to act like he didn't care that his future was already written in the statistics. But now he had nothing but time. And Mr. Anderson wasn't the type to let him waste it. You look like you're trying to stare a hole through that page. Anderson's voice broke the silence as he took a seat across from Jamal. The old man had a habit of moving quietly, always appearing when Jamal least expected him. Jamal shrugged. Ain't much of a reader. Anderson leaned back, raising a graying eyebrow. Ain't much of a lot of things until you decide to be. Jamal glanced down at the book, flipping through the pages without really reading them. You really think reading some old history books is gonna change my life? Anderson chuckled, shaking his head. Books don't change lives, but what you do with what's inside them, that's a different story. He tapped the table, his voice steady. Tell me something, Carter. You ever wonder why they build prisons based on third grade reading levels? Jamal frowned. What? Anderson nodded. Yeah, government studies literacy rates when kids are 8, 9 years old. They see how many of them can't read, and they predict how many prison beds they'll need in 20 years. Jamal felt a slow, cold realization crawl up his spine. That ain't real. It's real. Anderson folded his hands together. They expect you to fail before you even know how to spell your own future. That's how the system works. You were never supposed to make it out of Oak Ridge Heights. Never supposed to be anything but another number in a file. He leaned in. So you gonna let them be right about you? Jamal's jaw clenched. Something inside him shifted, like a weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying pressing just a little harder on his chest. He picked up the book, and this time he actually read. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Jamal spent every spare moment in the library poring over books like they held the key to a door he hadn't even known existed. History, philosophy, mathematics, psychology. At first it was just something to do, a way to escape, even if only in his mind. But then something clicked. For the first time he started seeing the world in a way he never had before. He read about men who had been written off as failures but had built legacies. He read about systems designed to keep people like him trapped. He read about people who fought to break out of those cycles, who refused to let their past define them. And somewhere in those pages, he found a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It wasn't just books. Anderson pushed him harder, made him think beyond the words on the page. What do you want, Carter? he asked one day, while they played a game of chess in the rec room. Jamal stared at the board, chewing the inside of his cheek. To get out. Anderson shook his head. Nah, that's not a goal. That's a countdown. What do you want when you get out? Jamal hesitated. He had never let himself think that far ahead. Don't know, he admitted. Anderson moved a pawn forward. Then figure it out. 'Cause if you walk out those gates without a plan, you'll be right back here before you know it. Jamal swallowed hard. He didn't want that. Not now, not ever. The day the letter arrived, he almost didn't believe it was real. He stared at the paper in his hands, rereading the words over and over. A scholarship. Through a prison education program, an organization had reviewed his test scores, his GED, the college courses he had started inside, and decided he deserved a shot. A real shot. One that didn't come with strings or conditions or whispered threats. Just a chance. Jamal pressed the letter against his knee, his hands shaking. And for the first time since that night in the car, he let himself imagine a different future. One where he wasn't just surviving, one where he was actually free. The steel doors groaned as they slid open, releasing a gust of stale, institutional air into the open world. The sun hit Jamal Carter's skin like a slap, harsh and blinding. He hadn't felt sunlight without barriers, without fences, bars, or the ever-present watchful eyes of guards. In 3 years, 6 months, and 14 days. He stood there, motionless, as the weight of freedom settled on his shoulders like an unfamiliar coat. His mother was waiting. LaToya Carter stood just beyond the gates, her small frame wrapped in a faded denim jacket, her hands clutching her purse strap, so tight her knuckles were white. When their eyes met, her face crumbled, and in an instant she was running toward him, arms wrapping around his chest, holding him like she could piece together the years that had been stolen from them. "My baby," she whispered against his shoulder. "My baby." Jamal squeezed his eyes shut, inhaling the familiar scent of her cocoa butter lotion, something that felt like home in a way he had almost forgotten. He was out, but freedom wasn't the same as a fresh start. The bus ride back to Oak Ridge Heights was quiet. His mother sat beside him, sneaking glances like she was afraid he might disappear if she blinked too long. Outside the window, the city looked the same. Cracked sidewalks, faded murals, kids playing basketball in the same courts where his life had begun spiraling. But he wasn't the same. "Got your room ready," his mother said softly, breaking the silence. "Ain't much, but it's yours." Jamal nodded. He appreciated it, but deep down, he knew the truth. He wasn't supposed to be here. Anderson's voice echoed in his head. "You walk out those gates without a plan. You'll be right back before you know it." He had a plan, the scholarship, college, a way out. But first, he had to make it through the next 24 hours without the past dragging him back. The first thing he noticed when they reached his old block was how little had changed. Same dudes posted up outside the bodega, same girls laughing too loud, same hollow-eyed kids watching from apartment stoops like they were already learning the rules of a game designed for them to lose. And then there were the ghosts of his past. Dante wasn't there. Word was, he got locked up 6 months after Jamal went in. But Kev was still around. "Yo, Carter!" Jamal turned, hands tightening into fists before he could stop himself. Kev leaned against a car, looking him up and down, a slow grin spreading across his face. He looked the same, like prison had never been an option for him, like his life had just kept rolling forward while Jamal's had been put on pause. "Didn't think I'd see you back here," Kev said, lighting a cigarette. Jamal met his eyes, his jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Didn't plan on it. Kev exhaled smoke, smirking. "Man, it's all love. I ain't the one who put you in there." Jamal took a step closer. "You watched me take the fall. Didn't say a damn word." Kev shrugged. "That's the game, bro. You knew what it was." Jamal felt the anger boiling inside him, the old version of himself. The kid who thought respect came from standing next to the right people, who thought silence made you strong. Would have swung, but that kid didn't make it out of prison. Jamal exhaled sharply, stepping back. Yeah, I knew. His voice was steady, final. That's why I'm done with it. Kev chuckled, shaking his head. You think you're different. Now? Man, the world don't care about second chances. Jamal turned, heading toward his building. He didn't look back when Kev called after him. Maybe the world didn't care, but he did. Adjusting to life outside wasn't easy. Job applications asked about his past before they even asked for his skills. Employers took one look at his record and saw a liability, not a man trying to rebuild his life. Doors slammed shut, over and over. Some nights it would have been easy, so damn easy to call up Kev, to make a few fast moves and get some money in his pocket. But every time the temptation crept in, he forced himself to remember the feeling of steel cuffs around his wrists, the sound of his mother crying, the nights lying awake in a 6x8 cell, wondering if he would ever be anything more than an inmate number. So he pushed forward. He worked odd jobs, sweeping floors, unloading trucks, whatever paid. He spent his nights studying, taking online courses, preparing for something bigger. And one day, an opportunity found him. At the Oak Ridge Community Center, a group of teens sat slouched in metal chairs, their expressions bored, guarded. Jamal knew the look. He used to wear it every day. A woman stood at the front of the room, introducing him. This is Jamal Carter. He's here to talk about making choices, about what happens when you think the streets have your back. Jamal cleared his throat, looking out at the faces staring back at him. He saw himself in their eyes, and for the first time since stepping out of that prison, he realized something. He wasn't just walking away from his past. He was building something new. The auditorium hummed with quiet conversation, the rustling of notebooks, and the occasional chime of a phone being silenced. The room wasn't packed, but there were enough people to make Jamal Carter's pulse quicken. Professors, students, community leaders, faces from different walks of life all gathered to hear him speak. Him, the same kid who had once been handcuffed against the hood of a police car. The stage lights cast a glow that made his skin feel too warm, the microphone in front of him standing taller than the boy he had been, but not taller than the man he had become. He took a slow breath, steadying himself, his fingers pressing against the edges of the podium. This wasn't just a speech, it was proof. People like me. Jamal's voice carried across the room, even though he spoke slowly, deliberately. We weren't supposed to make it here. A few heads nodded. Some people leaned forward listening. Others, maybe professors, maybe students with their own silent struggles, held his gaze, waiting. The first time I was called a statistic, I was 16. He let out a small, dry chuckle. It was my algebra teacher, Mr. Reynolds. He didn't say it to my face, of course. He said it to another teacher in the hallway when he thought I wasn't listening. Jamal lifted his chin. I was listening. Silence. A few people shifted in their seats. He said I'd either end up dead or in prison before I turned 20, that I was just another black kid from a bad neighborhood. Jamal let the words sink in before continuing, and for a while I believed him. The world didn't give me a reason not to. He paused, looking around the room. You see, when you grow up in a place like Oak Ridge Heights, the odds are stacked against you before you even know what they are. Schools are underfunded. Grocery stores sell more liquor than fresh food. And the streets? He exhaled, shaking his head. The streets will swallow you whole if you let them. His fingers gripped the podium a little tighter. I let them. He told them the truth. About Dante, Kev, the night at Rico's store. The cuffs, the courtroom, the judge who barely looked at him before handing him 6 years of his life in a box labeled felon. He told them about the first night in prison, how the cold, hard bed felt more permanent than any home he had ever known, how he thought that was it. Game over. And then he told them about Mr. Anderson. How many of you have ever had someone believe in you before you believed in yourself? A few hands lifted, some hesitated. Jamal nodded. That was him for me. A man serving time, just like I was. But he didn't let that define him. And he didn't let me define myself by my mistakes either. He could still hear Anderson's voice like it was yesterday. You can be a victim of your past or the author of your future. And Jamal had chosen to write a new ending. When he finished high school in prison, they told him it didn't matter. When he started taking college courses behind bars, they told him it was a waste of time. When he earned a scholarship and walked out of those gates, they told him the world would never see him as anything but an ex-con. He let their words fuel him, not just to prove them wrong, but to prove himself right. Now he stood in front of them, no longer just Jamal Carter from Oak Ridge Heights, Professor Carter, a college graduate, a mentor, a man who had taken the second chance life had thrown at him and refused to waste it. He saw the way the audience watched him, the way some students had that same guarded look he once had, like they didn't quite believe in second chances yet. So he gave them something to believe in. You are not where you come from, he said, his voice strong. Your past is a chapter, not the whole book. You get to decide who you're gonna be. A few claps, then more. The room filled with the sound of people who understood. Jamal took a step back, looking into the crowd. In the front row, his mother was crying. Somewhere in the back, a young kid from Oak Ridge Heights sat frozen, hanging onto every word, because he saw himself in Jamal, because maybe, just maybe, he could change his story too. Jamal's story proves one thing: your past doesn't define you, your choices do. So now I have to ask you, what's stopping you from rewriting your own story? Are you letting your circumstances decide your future? Or are you willing to fight for something better? Think about it. How many opportunities have passed you by because you believed you weren't good enough? How many times have you told yourself it's too late to change? It's not. And Jamal is living proof. So tell me in the comments, what's one step you're going to take today to build a better future for yourself? I want to hear your story. And if you don't want to miss more stories like this, ones that inspire, challenge, and push you to grow, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because trust me, this is just the beginning.